During its 25-year production run, Audi has launched 3 generations of the TT. There was the Mark I, which is now a modern classic thanks to its Bauhaus-inspired design, and this was followed by the Mark II, which took advantage of a much better platform to create a car that was as good to drive as it was to look at. And then in 2014, Audi launched the Mark III TT, which even today remains a highly recommendable coupe or roadster, and that's really impressive when you think that this car is now at the end of its production life. And in today's CarGurus UK review, we have proof that Audi fully subscribes to the theory of saving the best until last. This, folks, is the modestly named Iconic Edition. The Iconic Edition is one of 2 special editions that Audi is launching in order to bid farewell to the TT. The first is called the Final Edition, and that's available on the standard TT and TTS 4-cylinder models effectively. And that bundles extra equipment and some styling upgrades for an uplift of about £6,700. And then this Iconic Edition, well, this is only available on the TT RS, and again, it gets you some extra equipment and some visual upgrades, although perhaps not as many as you might think when you learn that over a standard TT RS, this has a premium of almost £30,000. Yes, you heard that right. Audi is charging almost £30,000 to upgrade from a TT RS to this Iconic Edition, meaning it costs £87,000. Given that the car is essentially mechanically unchanged over a standard TT RS, you might question the level of the uplift in price. But it would be a moot point because Audi has pretty much sold all 100 that it is going to build, including the 11 Iconic Editions that are destined for the UK. This then is a very rare car, and one that you have to assume is going to be coveted by collectors. Now, whether a TT could actually be worth £90,000 is one thing, but what is for sure is that it attracts attention like a £90,000 sports car should. People really seem to love it. At the heart of this car's appeal, as well as its rarity, are the visual add-ons. Now, there is a bit of an irony here because when Audi designed the original TT, the Bauhaus design philosophy really is all about how less is more, whereas with this car, which signals the end of the TT, it's very much more is more. And the first more that you get is this enormous fixed rear wing, so carbon fibre with these really interestingly shaped, very aggressive uprights. It's so big, this wing, that you almost wonder if the boot struts are going to be able to hold it, but they do. And while we're on the boot, same as a standard TT, so about 300 litres. It's a surprisingly practical little car. You do get 2 tiny seats, but they really are tiny to the point of not really being of any use at all, other than you can fold them and extend the low bay, which is handy. So other visual changes, diffuser, again, that's finished in carbon. Got some little winglets there. The wheels are 20-inch and they're wrapped in Pirelli P0s in a rubber band-like profile. You also get brake calipers painted in black. Then you get the standard matrix LED headlights, these little winglets here, a different splitter, and a gloss black grille. These upgrades all sit well against Audi's Nardo Grey paint, which is the only available colour for this Iconic Edition. Despite what the visual makeover might suggest, this is no wannabe racer. So, okay, the upgrades have been proven in the wind tunnel, but the car's no lighter than a standard TTRS. The engine is no more powerful, as we mentioned. The brakes and the suspension are the same, other than the fact that you get the painted black calipers that we talked about, and you get adaptive dampers as standard. But it's not had any weight taken out. It doesn't have a power upgrade. And actually, I think that probably works in the car's favour because it's deliberately not going after a Cayman GT4, and therefore is going to appeal to a different audience. Perhaps the most compelling bit of all is the interior, which ups the ante with Alcantara on the door panels and steering wheel, yellow stitching and a numbered plaque on the gear lever. The Mark III TT really does have a fantastic interior, and that's not by the measure of sports cars or not by the measure of its competition, but by any measure. In fact, I think this is probably the pinnacle of Audi interior design. And I say that for a couple of reasons. The first and most obvious is the quality. So the quality in here is off the scale. Everything that you touch is padded and beautifully finished. Even the bits that you wouldn't expect to be soft touch, like in between the vents here or down here under here, it's all soft touch. And as a result, it just feels like an incredibly high quality place to be. And then the other thing that's really appealing about the TT is the simplicity of its design. So obviously there's no central screen. It's all done within the virtual cockpit. In terms of usability, it's generally okay. There are moments when either the rotary controller here or the buttons on the steering wheel don't do the most obvious thing, particularly when you're using it to control Apple CarPlay. But generally speaking, it really does work well enough. And certainly if you're going to try and cram all of your infotainment into the dials, then Audi's virtual cockpit is a system you want to use because it remains probably the best on the market. But no, overall, sitting in here, it just gives you an enormous sense of quality. Everything is almost Bentley-like, the level of finish in here, and that really is saying something. And then, of course, there's these heating and ventilation controls. Now, usually when a manufacturer tries to do something fancy with heating and ventilation, they completely muck it all up by sticking it up in the screen or creating a fancy panel that changes functions. This system, this really works. So you've got twiddle the middle bits here to change the fan speed, press to turn the aircon on and off, press here to do the heated seats. It all just works brilliantly. And when I think about Audi's other interiors of more recent cars, like the new RS3, for example, it's just not a patch on this. It's just wonderful. Can you tell I like it? Alright, so the engine then, as we said, it's unchanged over the standard TTRS. So it's 2.5 litres, 5-cylinder, turbocharged. Now the fact it's unchanged, I'm not sure it matters all that much. It still has 400 horsepower and 480 newton meters of torque, which is plenty by any measure. And also, because it's a 5-cylinder, the quality of the sound is just fantastic. If you put it in dynamic mode, it actually pipes a bit of extra sound through the speakers, and it just sounds lovely. So the only slight criticism on the sound front is that it's not a little bit louder, but in terms of performance, this thing just goes. And if the sound is perhaps a bit strangled, then the top speed certainly isn't, because for the Iconic Edition, Audi has removed the 155 mile an hour limiter, so it now tops out at 174, which is useful. 0 to 62 miles per hour happens in just 3.7 seconds, which it'll do all day long courtesy of its launch control. So in terms of power delivery with this engine, there is a very slight pause when you put your foot down and then the turbo really coming in. But I actually quite like that. It gives the engine character and it makes you think about what you're doing. It makes you plan ahead of it. It gets you more involved in the drive. So let's give it a go here. So foot down, and then there it goes. When it goes, wow, it goes. And the other thing that really helps this car is the gearbox. So it's a 7-speed dual clutch, and the upshifts, listen to this. Oh, it's so quick. Yeah, it's a drivetrain is absolutely brilliant. But it's no one-trick pony, this car. It's not just good in a straight line. It actually has really good dynamic range and ability. So take the steering, for example. It's beautifully weighted, actually. You can change the weighting through the drive select, and there's an individual mode if you want the dampers to be softer and the steering to be heavier, or the other way around. And it responds really nicely. It's quick but not hyperactive, and there's even a bit of feel through this beautifully Alcantara wrapped wheel as well. It's just great. With Quattro all-wheel drive as standard, grip and traction are huge almost regardless of conditions, and the RS also benefits from impressive balance and poise. Perhaps what's most surprising about this Iconic Edition though, particularly given the way it looks, is that this isn't an overly aggressive, tough sports car. It's actually a very good Grand Tourer. It eats up the miles. And part of that is because it's actually quite quiet in here, and part of it is because these seats, as well as being superbly supportive, are actually very comfortable over long distances. But it's also because there's this real harmony to how everything works. It's not to say that it's laid back or lazy, actually it's not. It always feels taut and ready to respond, but there's just an oily slickness to it that makes it a very comfortable car, and that includes the ride. Which again is not overly soft, but the Mark III TT has always been a very well damped car. It's had very good body control, and that absolutely still applies to this Iconic Edition. Even with the adaptive dampers in their firmest dynamic mode, the TT isn't tiring or uncomfortable, and in its comfort setting you can go for hours without any cause for complaint. If all this is sounding a bit too effusive for what is essentially still a £90,000 Audi TT. Still sounds kind of crazy. Bear in mind that you can have pretty much all the good bits of the iconic edition in a standard TTRS and save yourself the best part of £30,000 in the process. But really that's not the point of this CarGurus UK review. Rather, the point is to recognise that as the TT comes to the end of its life, what a good job Audi has done in turning what is essentially a Volkswagen Golf platform into a proper sports car. Okay, the Mark 1 wasn't the best to drive, but Mark 2 onwards, they have been as good to drive as they are to look at. And given how good the iconic edition looks, I think it says a lot to say that that same thing absolutely still applies. Bye bye TT! For a look at another TT Special Edition, check out our review of the Mark 1 Quattro Sport. And if you want to find a TT or any other used car for sale, head to cargurus.co.uk. Thanks for watching.